Luís is an acclaimed writer who uses his dual culture life experiences to explore greater themes of love, loss, and triumph. He's the author of 16 books and has won numerous awards. He's what I consider to be a top of the food chain kind of writer. So he publishes poetry, fiction, and essays and nonfiction. The Devil's Highway, his 2004 nonfiction account of a group of Mexican immigrants lost in the Arizona desert, won the Lannan Literary Award and was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and the Pacific Rim Kiriyama Prize. A historical novel, The Hummingbird's Daughter, tells the story of Teresa Urrea, sometimes known as the Saint of Cabora and the Mexican Joan of Arc. The book, which involved 20 years of research and writing, won the Kiriyama Prize in Fiction, and along with The Devil's Highway, was named a Best Book of the Year by many publications. Urrea's most recent novel, Into the Beautiful North, imagines a small town in Mexico where all the men have immigrated to the US. A group of young women, after seeing the film The Magnificent Seven, decide to follow the men north and persuade them to return to their beloved village. This novel is part of the NEA's Big Read this year, alongside classics like To Kill a Mockingbird, Catcher in the Rye, and Their Eyes Were Watching God. In this year alone, Luís is releasing 3 titles. One, a re-release of a slim, beautiful nonfiction volume called Wandering Time. This past month, he released the Tijuana Book of the Dead, a collection of poems that the Washington Post called a gorgeous, engaging collection. Urrea captures the song and spirit of people who might otherwise be invisible. As difficult as the subject matter may be, the writing is radiant, showing how the worth of human beings can't be dimmed by a border, fence, or hot-button politics. And a new collection of stories, The Water Museum, will be out in just a few weeks. Urrea's work transcends media stereotypes and contemporary immigration disputes, revealing the border as a place of connection as well as divide. Quote, he says, quote, "The Mexican border is a metaphor. Borders everywhere are a symbol of what divides us. That's what interests me." And the border was not only the Mexican-American border as a physical border, a political border, but as a personal border as well. Born to a Mexican father and an American mother, he said in an interview with Bill Moyers, quote, "The border ran through our apartment. The kitchen was the United States, Mexico was in the living room, and Walter Cronkite was the ambassador to both countries." Luís has held teaching positions at Harvard, at the Massachusetts Bay Community College, and the University of Colorado. He is currently a professor of creative writing at the University of Illinois, Chicago. We are so lucky to have him here tonight. Thank you, Luís. We are all ears.
Buenas tardes, Seattle. Tijuana in the house. Claro. You know, that thing about the big read, we were talking about it up in the green room. It's really incredible for me, but let's be honest, most of the big read authors are dead. So communities like having an actual living writer to see. So it sounds cool, but I think when they think, Mark Twain or Luís, well, he could actually shake hands with the kids, so let's bring him. So it's an amazing thing for me. So I'm not used to giving lectures. Those of you who know me from Bread Loaf or Fish Trap, I like to do stuff like memorize a story and perform it. So, but I wanted to do this. When they called, wrote to me, I said, yes, absolutely. Richard Hugo, one of my greatest heroes, and the opportunity to come up here was just something I couldn't pass up. So it's on my concept of the understory, and I will put it up once I get home. I'll be leaving tomorrow after a workshop. I'll go ahead and put it up on my website if you want it, so you can have it written out. It's And I basically stole from Hugo's Triggering Town to write this whole thing. So it's called The Indirect Way is the Truest Path, on story and understory in 5 short chapters. Barry Lopez once said this, "It shall be our benediction. It is precisely what is invisible in the land that makes what is merely empty space, into one person, one place, into another." We might say it is precisely what is invisible in a story that makes what is merely empty words to one person, a person to another, a world to another. Make no mistake, there is a story hiding beneath your story. This epigraph has already done the work for me, so thank you for your attention, and good night. Chapter 1, in which we ponder Neil Gaiman dancing like a bee in the great state of Nebraska. This essay is not about Neil Gaiman. Not really. Partly, perhaps. One of his books does take place under London. Let's just say this. Neil Gaiman already knows everything there is to know about Understory. Good writing teachers will often point out we are putting on paper or on tawdry electric screens a modern version of an ancient ritual. Do you hear the drum beats? Can you smell the smoke of the morning cooking fire? You have come like a Viking bard or a Zen poet or a Yaqui medicine woman to sing of conquests and monsters and healings and death and mad copulations and many births. Creation myths. Our grandfathers came out of that oak tree over there, but your mother's people came out of this sea cave. Frost giants lurk out there in the new lands you found, or frost giants are coming over the hill, and you and your people dance and sing to find the story that would repel them. Under those headline stories lurks the breaking news. There's a big, wonderful, frightening, delicious, sexy, heartbreaking, alert, awful, sacred, and often invisible floating world out there, just beyond the trees. That's the understory. If you don't put it in, your reader will do it for you. You might as well get it under control so you can, like a shaman, make strangers dream. We all have secrets and secret lives. Even poems and novels and essays have secret lives. 2 sad words will explain Understory to us. Robin Williams. Look, when you drive across the United States, say on I-80, you're trailed by Cheyenne shadows, Lakota ghosts, phantom herds of buffalo moving as a forgotten brown sea, tides of whirring, insatiable passenger pigeons haunting the empty sky, baffled cavalrymen falling from their horses, nuclear missiles ticking softly in their steel tunnels, and a mile-high vanished ocean full of trilobites and praying mantises on the walls of empty motels. And the tire tracks you see in Farmer John's drought-scorched soybean field are actually the ruts of pioneers' covered wagons more than a century old. It's so boring until it's not. My daughter, who will return to this talk in a moment, once described Nebraska thus: field, 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 cow, field, 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 cow. An essay, perhaps, a haiku, a story. Travelers grab a pecan log and a Diet Coke from Stuckey's, but 100 yards from the public restroom, Unknown to the modern pilgrims, a forlorn German family once abandoned an upright piano. It stood as the headstone for the grave of their youngest son, who took a fever coming out of St. Louis. And after they had gone, the wheels of their prairie schooner squealing and moaning like the mourning sounds the mother made on the dirty trail under the dirty sail. After their sad yellow dust had settled, a Pawnee rider came. He rode across the plains and found the piano, and he amused himself for an afternoon, plunking away on the keys, making strange music that set the coyotes howling just yesterday. And bees meander there now, trying to find some clover. The story we sit down to write might be of a modern family in its car, ticking off deadly miles of endless 8-lane interstate, watching field, cow rolled past, but not fast enough. Neil Gaiman is on the CD player, reading one of his audiobooks. Coffee and sodas forgotten in the cup holders. The family is trying to get to Portland in 2 more days. The plot complication may be that the kids don't know Dad's an alcoholic and lost his teaching gig in Chicago due to his drinking, and Mom has given him one last chance. And the new job in Portland is only as an adjunct composition instructor, but this time he'll show them all. This time he'll stand tall and save his family. The understory begins with our sure knowledge that he will accomplish no such thing. This understanding will come to us from the narrator's attention to details surrounding her characters, details that look scenic, but that work arcane rituals to open our minds and hearts and guts to ghosts and echoes and uneasy memories of our own flailing. Alchemy. Narrator, put on your robe and your Jimmy Page symbol-embroidered wizard's lead guitarist trousers. Oh, thunder. Heading out is heading in. Climbing up into a story is also climbing head down into comforting, cool shadows. Even Ring Around the Rosie has an understory, dying of the Black Plague. My daughter was right when she was scared at bedtime so many years ago. There really is a boogeyman in the basement. Scary monsters, as David Bowie sang. Writing teachers call the indirect means of telling a story imagery. That's not shadowy enough. For example, the deep understory of our melancholy yet heroic family's car journey to Portland, deeper than the booze and the looming divorce, deeper even than dear Neil's voice, is the ruts in the prairie, the Pawnee rider, the piano, the dead German lad once covered by the music, now just a handful of dust waiting for a tornado to set it free, the drought, that relentless wind burning from Mexico to the Arctic Circle, the extinct creatures who invisibly roam the wastelands, the lonesome sound of bees. And if you are Flannery O'Connor, your understory would include a skinny man who drives a recklessly beat car and needs a shave and is buying a pecan log at Stuckey's with a pistol tucked into the back of his trousers, and who now pulls onto the interstate and idly follows the western-bound family, and he smiles. Sometimes the understory is the moment when any attentive reader says, "Oh shit." Did I mention bees? Neil Gaiman's a beekeeper. Praying mantises, still posing on those motel walls, eat bees. Bees are going extinct, like the old creatures that roamed these prairies, and the prairies the bees attend to are dying of thirst. under that vast ghost sea long vanished. You see what happened? Echoes. Understory is starting to creep into this lecture. Once it pries open your basement window, you can't keep it out. Bees are older than we are, but they have good memories. They have not forgotten the rituals that we have forgotten. Bees gather in their hives, and what few bees are left tell each other stories. They do it by dancing, which would be a grand writing tool for any workshop. The workshop teacher announces, the imagery in this piece of the empty field at sunset is lacking in a certain je ne sais quoi. Could you dance it out for us? If we were to watch the bees boogie down, we'd see waggling bottoms and nervous circles as other bees feel their movements and their twerks with their antennas and say, yes, yes, like Dean Moriarty and On the Road, yes. And they bomb out of that joint on a mad dash across the genetically modified fields of squid, tarantula, insecticide, Monsanto sunflowers. Their wings hit a rich, jazzy saxophone note, say middle C. The understory is that the bees' dance somehow explains to everybody back at the crib where the nectar is. You go a mile west, and at that cottonwood hang a left, fly 500 yards. There, my good ladies, ye will encounter clover and a smattering of daisies, an Indian paintbrush. But the nectar of the modified flowers will destroy their hive as they sleep. It's a tragedy. Bees know what the shimmy means way down in their beings, like we know what the scruffy dude driving down I-80 means. Understory is in your DNA, and Monsanto didn't put it there. Chapter 2, My Daughter versus Insidious Kinky, followed by Meditations on Eudora Welty. Our daughter used to be afraid of scary monsters. She called them carry-mongers. These mongers apparently lurked in the basement when they weren't in her closet or wickedly gathered under her bed. I had my own carry-mongers at her age, man-headed termites from the planet Xanti. I saw them on TV. I'll admit that I win Bad Dad of the Year award because her carry-monger was named Kinky and was entirely my fault. You know how it is. You're driving your little family down I-80. Everybody's bored. She's strapped in her astronaut safety chair and back, kicking your seat and demanding stories. And you're trying to listen to the Mexican dance band Kinky. Oh, you know him? Yeah. And Kinky makes some weird noise and you tell her, that's Kinky, the monster. I bought his record. A small voice comes from behind you. Kinky, the monger? As all authors will, she took it from there. One day we dropped our son off at high school. She gawked out the window at a wrecked car. The Mothers Against Drunk Driving chapter had hauled this awful ruin onto the lawn to scare the Naperville Huskies out of drinking and driving. And my girl asked, is that Kinky's car? Her understory already had Kinky figured out. He spoke Spanish. He liked dancing. He was a carry-monger. And he drove a hell car. What I didn't realize until later was that Kinky's car actually flew. The car no longer had wheels, you see. Understory makes sense even when it doesn't make sense. If a car can't drive, you can be sure it's going to fly. He flew around in the dark, looking in kids' windows when he wasn't hiding behind our freezer downstairs. His secret spot, by the way, was also behind our son's drum set, which makes sense since Kinky loved funky jams while eating the souls of children. It's kind of like an R.L. Stine story. If you are a victim of understory, like Mr. Stine is, it won't take you long to think, OMG, Kinky is behind the freezer? Kinky has a freezer? And your reader will beg you not to. To never, oh never, please don't. Oh yeah, the hell with it, do it. Don't open the freezer. Let us go highbrow, or higher brow than these anti-misfits on TV, and Kinky in his wasted station wagon. St. Eudora Welty repeated a fine understory quote by Willa Cather in The Eye of the Story. Wait, hold up, y'all. Eudora Welty and Willa Cather. By God, I could stop right here and suggest you just run out and get their books, find out what I'm talking about on your own. Ask any lecturer. It's our task to be like Tom Sawyer, trying to convince the kids to paint the fence for him while having a good time. Don't even get me started on Mark Twain. Ms. Cather said, quote, "Whatever is felt upon the page without being specifically named, that, one might say, is created." St. Eudora says of this way of writing and thought, quote, "All Willa Cather's prose speaks of the world in a way to show it's alive. Her own living world is around us as we read, present to us through our eyes and ears and touch." Yes? This from my Antonia. More than anything else, I felt the motion in the landscape, in the fresh, easy blowing morning wind, and in the earth itself, as if the shaggy grass were a sort of loose hide, and underneath it, herds of wild buffalo were galloping. Field, 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 cow. Field, 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 understory. It seems to me that every spot in a piece of prose that you can cut into an effective found poem is where you have discovered a portal into understory. Damn right. Sorry. I will return to this at the end. Chapter 3. We're halfway there, y'all. Chapter 3, the eye of the story. Thus spake the revelator. Before I get to George Orwell, the actual topic of this essay, I told you it was a crooked path. I have to walk around the basement with Eudora Welty some more, and we will visit Ernest Hemingway for a second, and furthermore, discuss turtles. Was there ever a better title for a book about writing than The Eye of the Story? First, Ms. Welty knew a secret. The title of a book or story or poem or essay is also its first line. The title is the opportunity to unleash the understory. Get the unseen world working for you before your readers know what's happening to them. It's a damned sneak attack is what it is. And what is this title telling us? It's telling us that the story is watching. It's looking. What's it looking at? Why, everything. Maybe even us. Maybe the story is reading the people reading it. This is some kind of disturbing trope out of Latin American novels. This is Borges, Cortázar, not St. Eudora Welty. She chuckles, wicked to the end. She says in the same book, quote, "Some stories leave a train of light behind them, meteor-like, so that much later than they strike our eyes, we may see their meaning like an afterthought." Wow. She also says the story comes to the eye first. It's seen, that eye we're talking about. But that meteoric light, which in Hemingway she attributes to the shock of modern readers to morality, comes after. It's a ninja, that understory, sneaking up on you, like this. A worn path. Many literature and American Lit 101 and writing students have read this short story. Many professors have droned on about it. Ms. Welty's hero, Willa Cather, liked to dissect gophers and snakes to see what made them tick. So let's borrow a ninja blade and cut a little. Title, y'all. It ain't the worn path, it's a worn path. How many are there? Well, we know there are more than one. In the world, probably. In the life of the viewpoint character, oh yes. Miss Phoenix Jackson has walked many a weary and worn path. She is old and she is tired and she is plodding on without rest or comfort. The story begins, it was December. Pardon me for interrupting, but it was December. You know that old cliche? May, December, or the milder version, September. Romance, how December is the old part, the end of the year part, the almost dead part, the cold part. Winter, teachers tell you, winter. Teachers tell you to start in the middle of the action. Eudora Welty starts at the end. Now back to the story. I quote, "It was December, a bright frozen day in the early morning, far out in the country. There was an old Negro woman with her head tied in a red rag coming along a path through the pine woods. Her name was Phoenix Jackson. She was very old and small, and she walked slowly in the dark pine shadows, moving a little from side to side in her steps with the balanced heaviness of a pendulum in a grandfather clock." Excuse me again. Is this a happy story? Look at the language of it. Let's see. It's frozen. Dark shadows. Although it's bright, it doesn't seem to be a welcoming light, does it? Seems a bit harsh. Notice Miss Phoenix's name. Yes, the phoenix. Rises from its ashes, dies and burns and rises. But also, Ms. Welty gives her the demanding presence of a last name as well. A personhood in this dehumanizing space and possibly dehumanizing mind of her readers. I would guess in Mississippi, yes. What is the only lively detail here? Her bright red bandana made tellingly of a rag. Miss Phoenix Jackson is clearly not wealthy, is she? Now, in these scant 4 sentences, let us examine how many times mortality, time, or frailty are mentioned. 1, December. 2, frozen. 3, old woman. 4, phoenix. 5, very old. 6, small. 7, walked slowly. 8, in the dark pine shadows. 9, side to side in her steps. 10, pendulum. 11, grandfather clock. Pine shadows. What are poor country people buried in? Pine boxes. And notice another thing. She's far out in the country, but it's early morning. Miss Phoenix has been struggling since before sunrise. She has lived a long story before you or I even began reading. Now imagine the life leading up to this hard, cold rising. It's Understory. Let us complete this crushing opening paragraph. I quote, "She carried a thin, small cane made from an umbrella, and with this she kept tapping the frozen earth in front of her. This made a grave and persistent sound in the still air that seemed meditative, like the chirping of a solitary little bird." Stop, Miss Welty. Have mercy. I can't take this anymore. This is devastating. I don't know how you can keep from weeping. Hard, 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 full of pitiless love. And yes, you who get the Understory idea, Ms. Welty used the word grave, all right, rather than somber or sad. Just so, your deepest bones that are heading to the same burial shroud as Miss Phoenix Jackson will feel it. For you poets, consider the usage of language, specifically music in the language. You'll find precious few bright sibilants or lively whee tones. This elegy has a dirge's burden of long, low moaning sounds, flat A sounds, low O sounds, short I sounds, long crying A sounds to answer the flat A's. The whole opening is a chorus of sorrows. And while you're at it, check her rhythm, slow as breath. William Stafford said, if you breathe, you're in the rhythm business. And possibly rage. I'd say yes, rage. You don't even need the rest of the story. It's all right there, everything you'll ever need. Can you see it? Elsewhere, St. Eudora wrote, out of love, you can speak with straight fury. Hemingway, no stranger to straight fury, had an iceberg theory, aka the theory of omission. Cut out the extras. He parsed it down to understory. He famously said the dignity of movement of an iceberg is due to only 1/8 of it being above water. Right? The bulk is unseen. But the Titanic, for one, certainly felt it. Being a nature fan, I see it as a snapping turtle. The story shows its back like a little oval island floating in the murk, but the flippers, the engine that drives it, are under the water, working invisibly. Oh yeah, and by the way, so is the mouth that can bite off your finger. Chapter 4, a cookbook of life and death with Chef George. How is this magic trick done? Did you put your Jimmy Page pants on? Because one does so appreciate the alchemical value of metaphor and simile, the delicious stew of fancy verbiage. The problem is that dipping your ladle into that vat of available wordplay is often like spooning up some stale porridge. Oldie woldie, as a tour guide in London once said about all the old buildings. It isn't accomplished with adjectives and adverbs. The true wizard can drop one hard noun in your path and spin you around and drop you. George Orwell once complained in a general rant about politics and English, quote, the writer knows more or less what he wants to say, but an accumulation of stale phrases chokes him like tea leaves blocking a sink. I want to steal that one. Tea leaves in a sink. Can't you see that? Understory is not impressed with written acrobatics or fancy language. Understory is accessed through color, weather, sound, nature, setting, wind. Understory is alive with creaks and moans, ticking clocks and seasons, a shoe, a book on a table, a grave, an unmade bed, music. Understory loves old things, a forgotten earring laying on the floor, Jimi Hendrix, a box of buttons in the empty sewing room. Although we have dropped the word sublime in that bubbling porridge vat of oldie-woldy terms, the sublime is a good thing to hide under the surface. Sublime as in dark and light, as in beauty and dread, as in terror, as in death, lightning forking out of a magnificent storm to kill you and your family, as in a Led Zeppelin song, as in that good old fear of God, sublimity. Understory is also playful. At home, our basement does house Kinky the Monger, yes, but it also houses a few million toys, video games, and my son's drums. Japanophiles and haiku lovers like me and Zen practitioners already know what I'm going to say. And that is the concept of wabi-sabi. Look it up. I'm trying to keep this from becoming a book, so I won't talk too much about it. Try Richard Powell's Wabi-Sabi Simple, or watch a brown sparrow looking for seeds on a mountain. And understand, they both, like you, will die. The sparrow and the mountain. Take it in deep and give it back like breath. Or read Isa and Basho and Buisson. Understory is where the echoes of your humanness reverberate. Orwell, with no time for wabi-sabi, says, first of all, the physical memories, the sounds, the smells, and the surfaces of things. How Hemingway, how Willa Cather, how Eudora Welty, who might have seen meteor light streaming off the hard surfaces of George Orwell. How Zen. Now, Orwell's essay, A Hanging. My students groan. I've been torturing them with this brutal piece since 1982. Orwell himself was an imperialist working in Burma and overseeing such things as executions of natives. Before he became a socialist saint, that is, like Ms. Welty, he knows better than to call the piece the anything. A hanging will suffice because there are so many of them. He already condemns England in the first 2 words of his composition. Quote, it was Burma, a sodden morning of the rain, a sickly light like yellow tinfoil was slanting over the high walls into the jail yard. Wait, sodden or sudden? Because some of the shocks come suddenly. And yellow tinfoil? It's disgusting, whatever it is. Like the foil off the turkey after the meal is done, all clotted with congealed grease. I imagine chewing this foil and I want to jump out the window, but I cannot. There are no windows. We're behind jail walls. And the filthy, spoiled foil is God's own light, dripping rancid fat on the ground. Quote, we were waiting outside the condemned cells, a row of sheds fronted with double bars, like small animal cages. Each cell measured about 10 feet by 10 and was quite bare within, except for a plank bed and a pot of drinking water. In some of them, brown, silent men were squatting at the inner bars with their blankets draped over them. They were the condemned men to be hanged within the next week. Nice visit to the zoo, right? Are we seeing anything here but the monkey display at the zoo? 10-foot square double-barred cages with hunched brown creatures staring at pots of water? The misery index in 6 sentences. 1, Burma, miserable in the minds of his readers. 2, sodden. 3, rains. 4, sickly light. 5, yellow tinfoil. 6, high walls. 7, jail yard. 8, condemned cells. 9, row of sheds. 10, double bars. 11, small animal cages. 12, cell 10 feet by 10 feet. Just to make sure you know what a small cage means. 13, quite bare. 14, plank bed, no comfort here. 15, pot of drinking water. Notice, no food. 16, brown silent men. 17, squatting at the bars. 18, blankets draped over them. 19, condemned men, in case you didn't get at the beginning of the paragraph that they were condemned. And 20, to be hanged, an inarguable redefinition of condemned. This is also the definition of what my son, the drummer, calls sucks to be you. But you already know the understory says it sucks to be us. The men are dehumanized in writing because they were dehumanized in life. And because the understory knows the Western reader might very well see them that way as a habit of mind. Nothing is more dangerous than making the unseen visible. Empathy ruins violence. Why do you think I wrote The Devil's Highway? Forgive me for laying out some principal story elements briefly to move us along, but the man inside the cage does not want to come out to be executed, and they have to pry him off the bars. But they get him going, and all the warders and police and hangmen with this fellow, small and skinny between them, walk. Until this, quote, suddenly, when we had gone 10 yards, the procession stopped, and without any order or warning, a dreadful thing had happened. A dog came from goodness knows whence, had appeared in the yard. It came bounding among us, running up to us with a loud volley of barks, and it leapt around us, wagging its whole body, wild with glee at finding so many human beings together. Understory knows something really wicked. Dogs humanize us. The dog likes the condemned man. For the first time in the entire piece, Orwell uses human beings to describe them all, including the prisoner. Now, Orwell begins to slay his readers from Kinky's terrible basement, for the dog, an Airedale no less, an English dog, suddenly claims the condemned creature for us as a fellow human being. And Orwell next shows us this man walking on to his death. And he steps around a water puddle. How human is that? He's me. He's you. He's trying to keep his poor feet dry. Only now that he's truly visible in both story and understory does Orwell strike a mortal blow for him. Quote, "It is curious," he says to us in our sitting rooms, hoping perhaps his understory will lead us to the same grace. But till that moment, I had never realized what it means to destroy a healthy, conscious man. When I saw the prisoner step aside to avoid the puddle, I saw the mystery, the unspeakable wrongness of cutting a life short when it is in full tide. This man was not dying. He was alive, just as we are all alive. All the organs of his body were working, bowels digesting food, skin renewing itself, nails growing, tissues forming, all toiling away in solemn foolery. His nails would still be growing when he stood on the drop, when he was falling through the air with 1/10 of a second to live. His eyes saw the yellow gravel and the gray walls, and his brain still remembered, foresaw, reasoned even about puddles. He and we were a party of men, walking together, seeing, hearing, feeling, understanding the same world. And in 2 minutes, with a sudden snap, one of us would be gone. One mind less, one world less. It is unbearable. I want to weep for this man. I want to cry out, stop, stop. But Orwell does not stop. And the death is unsettling and brutal. You must forgive me here for pointing out the technique. It is devastating because it is powerful, sure. But would it have worked? It's awful magic, if not for that yellow foil and the cage and the rain and the happy dog to set you up, the puddle. Orwell fooled your soul, or his readers' souls in England, into painting that fence for him. We got splattered. Chapter 5, the end, found. Remember when I told you to seek the place in your story that could be shaped into a found poem? This is where Understory has its portal. This is where you see it work. This is where it takes a breath. It rises like a speckled little trout through leaf shadows, over the mottled bed of round-colored stones in the stream bed, writhing oblongs of light, rippling its shadow beneath it, coming steadily as if moving through soft green glass to kiss a mayfly off the surface of the water from below. The more you watch for Understory, the more you will see. It needs to know you are worthy of seeing it, but when you show yourself worthy, it will open itself before you. You won't believe how beautiful it is. About poetry, haiku master Basho wrote, The style I have in mind is a light one, both in form and in structure, like the impression of looking at the sandy bed of a shallow river. There it is. That is all understory. He's not saying your river must be shallow. He's saying the understory must be discovered as if the river were shallow. He's saying its light and colors and shadows must be found by those who can see beneath the surface. The surface is lovely, no doubt, but gold dust spins in its depths. My advice to you is to love them both. In closing, I'll share a story with you. It's by Alan Weir. It's from a book with the same name as the story, and the story is called Things About to Disappear. Well now, after this long journey we just took together, you know a thing or two about this. One thing you know, we ourselves are things about to disappear, along with all other things. Sooner or later, even the happy dog dances around us for a short time. Understory loves lists. Weir is one list-loving son of a gun. Listing serves the understory because it makes you see, really see. And it's the writer's movie director trick. It is our version of slow motion. So when the narrative slows way down and we are shown incredible detail, we see beyond the things we see. It's alchemy. In the story, a car flies off an embankment. Weir's narrator says, "And that second caught and held for me like the car held in the air, and I saw all these things, colon." You know you're in trouble when there's a colon. A bird gliding just before it dives, a kite the second its string breaks, a falling leaf, a thrown stick, a fish jumping and caught in the sun. You get the idea. He goes on. "Look at this," he says. "Look at this, and look at this. Hey, look at this." Every small haiku in that list is a story of its own. Hell yeah, I looked, and I stole it. I put it smack in the beginning of my first novel, In Search of Snow. I enjoyed stealing it, and I plan to steal it again. Things About to Disappear is basically a story about a young man who has lost his father and who's trying to drive out of Texas into the scary dark ahead in the east, facing what has gone and what is to come. And that journey is always made alone. I make it every day. I bet you do too. The whole thing is a series of lists until the structure reveals itself to be a list. The whole thing. Unconnected elements happen in a parade of wonders and boredoms, and a strange music is rung from that dry highway. Field, 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 cow, yeah. But in this song of indirect storytelling, a moment appears. It falls into poem form all by itself. It uses a scrap of paper and an old wallet to break your heart. I cut it up to make a poem. Check it out. Tell me if this isn't what we've been talking about and trying to figure out. And I remember my daddy in the last week of his brave month. Remembered the evening I walked into his room where he lay lost in the big double bed, disappearing before our very eyes. His arm going up like a chicken wing, plucked and washed for frying, his skinny elbow over his eye, tears running down his sharp, bony cheek. "Don't see me like this, son. Please don't." His face gone, all bones, huge white eyes, nose, teeth, a medieval woodcut of death. I remembered holding his long, thin fingers, how cool and dry they were, how soft, how much love I felt through those thin pads of his fingers, felt them twitch and tremble with pain and sadness, saw him smile at me, his lips unnaturally wide and pink in his disappearing face. And he said, "You know, son, while I'm lying here, the past sort of floats by like a good old movie, and I thought I'd reach out and grab some of it and give it to you. I remember suffering because I couldn't make him whole again, because I didn't have some magic word to say to him. And he went on. For instance, when I was a kid, here he stretched out his arm toward the window. I heard there for the first time all summer the cicadas in the live oak. We used to call them, what are those? Cicadas, I said. Yeah, that's right. We used to call them crickedees. And he spelled it out for me. And he told me that since I liked words, I might like a word like crickedees. And I tore off a piece of paper from the telephone pad by his bed, and I wrote it down, and I folded it up, and I put it in my wallet, where it still is. Crickedees, smelling like leather and sweat. That's it. Thank you. So now we take an intermission. Is that what's happening? All right. Intermission time.
I'm curious about how you approach Understory differently, if you do, between fiction and nonfiction. Is there a difference?
I'm super blessed in that I get to publish in all the genres. So, in my personal sort of understory that's behind all of that, I would say that I was really naive because I was self-taught. So my dad was a janitor at bowling alleys, and I grew up in the back of the bowling alleys watching my dad rebuild bowling pins. And I thought, okay, yeah, it's like working a lathe and building a bowling pin. That's what writers have to do. So I thought I had to learn everything. And then I found out that we specialize. But by the time I got to the point where I was teaching and there were all these specialists, I thought, but I like doing everything. So that process for me is I realized even unconsciously central to each of the genres I write in. I'd say since probably 1995, fueled heavily by people like Basho and Issa. People are always really kind to me about Hummingbird's Daughter, for example, and I always tell them it's 25,000 haiku in a row. It's a little different with something like Devil's Highway, which is really harsh and driven by news events and so forth. But the great thing about Devil's Highway is that there are all these things hidden under the surface. So one of the realizations for me, I had to, if you don't know the book, I had to penetrate the U.S. Border Patrol. Interesting job for me, and investigate this horrible death that happened. And to realize suddenly that all the people in the story were aliens on a landscape they didn't belong in, that they were on indigenous lands, that had a whole different view of creation and the world and nature and place. And one of the Indian people that I was speaking to said to me, Hail Marys don't work out here. Out here, you all pray to the wrong God. And that gave me the whole book, and I realized that there was this whole underworld of lifeways and belief and approach, and that the human smugglers, the smuggled people, and the Border Patrol were all in territory they didn't belong in, and they didn't know how to negotiate that territory. And some of them were the cavalry, and so they overwhelmed it with technology, and the others were the bandits, so they tried to sneak, and then there were the people who ended up being victims, who were destroyed by not knowing how to deal with that land. So that was really Understory. And you have to be careful, because you can go a little crazy in nonfiction. And there's a passage that people really like, even though they're all, very understanding, because you made that crap up. And that was after they're dead. And they're being hauled back in an air-conditioned truck. over the trip that killed them. And it's only like, an hour's drive. And the bodies are sliding around in the back. And I imagined that one father who died with his son, their hands touching. And that they're having this weirdly comfortable trip to their funeral. But that's how that asserted itself to me. So, I think it's Jungian in some ways, maybe,
Yeah, so you said in your talk that Understory is in your DNA, but
Yeah.
just like you can get it there too. I mean, you don't have to be born with it necessarily. It sounds like.
But I think we are, I think we are. Come on. If someone says to you, I love you, or if someone says, I love you, but there's a whole story right there. It's like, oh my God, no! Right? So we know this stuff, and we watch for it, and we don't even know we watch for it, but we do. And we respond to things. And I do think, this my daughter I talked about, she came out spouting it, man. I used to put her to bed and tell her stories, like Dad does, and especially writer Dad. My wife's like, go tell her a story, writer man, And I'd put her to bed, and she was a year and a half old. And she's laying there in bed, and I'd say, okay, that's the story. Good night, kids. She's like, good night, Dad. And I get up to leave, and she says, Dad. And I said, what? And she said, the last time I came to Earth, I was your father. I said, what? She said, I was your father, and you were very afraid of thunderstorms, and when it rained, you'd hide under the table. And I was like, go to sleep. I was not happy. But, I thought, wow, this chick's going to write a novel someday,
So I have a kid who asks for a story to be told all the time. I just have to ask, does that exhaust you and deplete you, or does that fill you up? Because it exhausts and depletes me.
Yeah, it changes, It changes. Peter Straub once said to me, because my wife was like, the kids don't read Luís's books. And he's like, no kid reads their parents' books. Are you crazy? And he said, my kids loved my stories until at about 13, they suddenly discovered I was the worst and stupidest person ever born. And, I think there's a certain moment when they radically detach. But then she starts doing her own. She's become some little art monster, and she's actually far beyond where I was at 15. So I always tell her, you really make me mad, because you're a better drawer than I am. You're acting in more plays than I acted in, and you're writing really well.
Wow.
But it's funny to watch. So she's doing her own now. So there has been a reversal. There was a long period when I had to sit through her endless stories. Dad, I'm writing a novel. Oh no! And then she, start reading me these chapters.
You were talking about Understory being echoes, and I don't think this is exactly what you meant, but I do wonder, does something magical happen when you repurpose material from nonfiction into fiction?
Yeah.
Or, can you, can you talk about it? Or is it just really, truly magic?
It's a trade secret. It's because I've been working, my fiction is sort of between historical and contemporary. And it's really funny because a lot of the times when I write contemporary stuff, I cannot, tear myself away from my old homies, in the barrio. It's so hilarious the way they talk and the way they act and stuff. So all of those things come flying in, things I've heard people say or do, or people's names. That shows up a lot. But the historical stuff, like Hummingbird's Daughter and Queen of America, yes, between the two of them was 26 years of research. And for Hummingbird's Daughter, I spent 10 years in archives and libraries and stuff. And just to show you, I've gotten myself now in the roundabout thing, talking about that, bless you. But, I in 95, I thought I better go to Tucson and be close to Yaqui people, because the Hummingbird's Daughter was, Yaqui, Mayo. And I went down there and I did a reading my phone rang the next day. I was in the newspaper. And this woman says, Luís Urrea? And I said, yeah. And she said, oh, I'm your cousin Esperanza. And I said, my cousin Esperanza? And she said, yeah, mijo, I live here in Tucson. I said, wait, I got cousins in Tucson? She said, yeah, you got cousins in Tucson. She says, I'm Mayo, my husband's Yaqui, and your cousins across the street are Apaches. And I said, I've got Apache cousins? What? You know? And she says, I'm a medicine woman, and I was raised by Maclovia Borbón Moroyoki, the medicine woman of El Júpar, Sonora. And I thought, oh my God, you know, everything I was trying to learn in a bundle, and it's my cousin. And she says to me, mijo, I have a message for you. And I've never, it's the first time, it's like the first 3 minutes I'm talking to this woman, right? I said, what is it? And she says, before we were born, when we were in heaven, we were identical twins. And I was like, wow, really? And she said, yes, and God, as a test, sent us to different parts of the world. And she said, I've been looking for you for 43 years, and I found you in the paper this morning. I was like, what? But here's the kicker. And then she says, so you want to come to a party? I said, yeah. And that's how Hummingbird's Daughter happened.
Wow.
She took me in, and then other medicine people, as soon as she took me in, started taking me in. And women. It's one thing to talk to medicine people. It's another thing to be a guy and walk in and the women sacred people will teach you stuff. Like her job was to take adolescent girls at their first moon time, as they put it, away from culture and this secret training time. And she knew a lot of stuff. So people would start teaching me, and then all these medicine people came. So the next 10 years was, yes, archive, but then, you know, hanging out with shamans and medicine people and seeing ghosts. And I was like, what is happening to me? But that, you realize at some point, is research. And you try to understand what is okay to tell and what is not. One of my best buds is Sherman, Alexi. And, you know, he told me once, you know, I'm going to have to kick your ass for writing this book. I said, I'm not going to make it a shopping catalog, you know, for people. And the people would tell you, like, the word for white folks, if you haven't read the book, in the Yaqui world is yori. And their worst insult was yorivichi, which means naked white man. That was their worst insult. You naked white man! And they would say, you know, this is good for the yoris to know. You should tell them this. But people would tell you, this is for us. They don't need to know the name, or they don't need to know the ritual. Change it. So I'd make specious stuff that reflected, you know. But all of that's great. And that's a little cosmic and mystical, but I will also say that nothing beats a library. Nothing beats that old microfilm. And, you know, and there are so many great esoteric texts, man. There's for people who like Western writing, I know you do. You know that the Dictionary of the American West. You know that book? And I stole from that so much because it just made me laugh out loud. There's a thing in it where the cowboys used to call a loaded gun having beans in the wheel. I'd never heard that before. Clint Eastwood never said that. I got beans in my wheel.
I had a whole paragraph in my book that I took out of, it's like a cowboy lingo dictionary. I couldn't let go of any word, so I just put it all in there.
Right?
Yeah.
I go insane. I cheat my books to put more of that crap in there. Okay. Yeah. So hardcore stuff and mystical stuff to me are equal because they bring life to the text, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. Poetry is on its own. You know?
So if we can nerd out about research for just a minute.
Yeah, let's nerd out about research.
Okay. When I was working on my book, and a first book, my only book to date, I just, you know, it was like mind-blowing, mind-boggling what to do with all this stuff. And I was in New York, and one of my professors invited me to her apartment, and she took me into her bedroom, and she had a closet that spanned the entire room. And, you know, in New York, like, most people need that, right?
Yeah.
Just for their shoes.
Yeah.
And she peeled open the doors, and there were just file cabinets, gigantic file cabinets. And she writes about presidents, so she has a lot of research, but, you know, she opened the file drawers, and she showed me her files, and it just blew my mind. And I thought, oh God, is that how I have to do it? But how do you do it? So you're collecting all these pieces of information, and then what can you give us a little glimmer in your file drawer? Like, how do you organize? How do you?
You know, it's funny you should ask that, because for the first time in my life, suddenly universities want my archive. It's just my crap, you know, but they want my archive. So I'm haggling with University of Arizona, and it's really fun, but it's weird because I'm like, I got to cut some stuff out of some of those journals. They're like, no sanitizing. I said, oh yeah, I'm going to sanitize some stuff. But yeah, I have a lot of files built up, a lot of stuff, you know. When I did Devil's Highway, it was mostly because the people in the story died in May 2001, and I was on the story in August 2001. So there were a lot of official reports and death scene videos and stuff like that, autopsy things, but there weren't any documents. And so, you know, that was just boots on the ground and me trying to get in with the Border Patrol, who didn't want me around. And then they finally let me in. And then what I call grace, I don't know how to deal with it except in spiritual terms, but there's this form of grace that happens when you go in to do a story, and then for no reason, the story comes and the people trust you and hand it over. And these hard, mean, suspicious Border Patrol dudes just cracked and started giving me their lives, knowing that I could harm them if I wanted to, and was intending to. I was full of righteous Chicano rage. I'm gonna get the stinking Border Patrol, man. And then these guys revealed themselves as human beings, and I fell apart, you know. So that was notebooks full of jotting, and it started coming out of there. Hummingbird's Daughter, I'm like that. I have boxes and boxes of stuff, and the things about her had disappeared and were hard to find, and that's probably why it partly took 20 years to get it. And some of the stuff, you know, things happen that are inexplicable. Talk about Understory. She was affiliated, my aunt, the Hummingbird's daughter, was Teresa Urrea, the saint of Cabora, the Mexican Joan of Arc. And her teacher was a guy named Lauro Aguirre, and he was one of the fathers of the revolution and a newspaper man. So she and Lauro Aguirre wrote a book that had disappeared. And there was a man named William Curry Holden, who was the only expert on the Yaqui Indians in the United States, a historian. And he had discovered her while researching them, and he wrote a book about her. And he mentioned in 1963 that he saw a photostat, the only surviving copy of that book. So my stuff comes out, Hummingbird's Daughter comes out, all the descendants that I didn't know started showing up. And this one cousin in Texas, cousin Bernie, La Bernie. Bernie's one of those cousins who sends you an email and says, Primo, I woke up this morning and I was levitating 18 inches outside of my bed. And I'd go to my wife, hey Cindy, guess what? Cousin Bernie's levitating. She's like, of course she is, dear, you know. And so we're corresponding, and she says, we got that book that old man had. And I said, what book? And she goes, the old book. The guy had the book. He gave it to us. I said, Lauro Aguirre's book? Yeah, you want it? So she mails it to me. You know, it's the only copy. It's the actual old, you know those weird Xeroxes where it was black with white? That's how old it was. And I've got it. So I was thinking, this is really cool. And I go down to William Curry Holden's archives, which are at Texas A&M, and there's a second copy there, but there's an autographed picture of Teresita in it that no one's ever seen. So, in those ways, even research has this other life too. And if you're open to it, things will speak to you and you'll be totally surprised. Little moments come out, and sometimes you have to be really attentive that it's the smallest little thing that you might gloss over. And a lot of people do. We were talking about this war book I'm working on.
I want to talk about that.
And, it's all the women in that book have been completely ignored by every historian.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about that. You're working on a book that involves a lot of World War II research based on some experiences your mother had in Europe during the war. And how's that going for you?
Pretty good. I can tell you this, if you're a writer and you come to your publisher with, I've got a really hot World War II story no one's ever heard before, they're like, ka-ching, right? But now you have to really deliver, and I don't know if I can or not, but my mom was in World War II in the Red Cross, not a nurse, but a donut dolly, making coffee and donuts. And she was in battle. My mother and her crew of women were the foremost frontline women in combat in World War II. She landed on Omaha Beach. She drove all through Europe making donuts and coffee. She fought the Battle of the Bulge with a donut, not a pistol. Yeah, and Band of Brothers, she was there. That siege in Band of Brothers, the siege in Saving Private Ryan, she was in those towns. Stephen Ambrose never mentioned them. Not one historian has ever talked about these women because, they just made coffee, right? And they were in battle. They were in combat. They were fired upon. They saw every imaginable horror. They almost died many times. They were in the siege of Bastogne, the entire thing. They were rescued physically by Patton. They liberated Buchenwald. The Donut Ladies. How do you like that?
Is that the title?
No. It's called Goodnight, Irene. And she, these women, they had these GMC 6x, and the Army built a kitchen on the back, and it had a serving window. And they would, at a stretch, cook 48 dozen donuts, 57 dozen donuts. And they would pull up into a battle, and these GIs would turn around, and all these Betty Grable-looking babes, hey, GI, want a donut? Can you imagine? It was never in the HBO film, it's not anywhere. And they're not even footnoted. And the only place you'll ever see them, if you watch these things, the HBO series, The Pacific, there's a moment when the guys come out of Guadalcanal and there's this babe with donuts. Hi, GI, want a donut? With her lipstick, and they're like, what? And I realize it's like a scene from Apocalypse Now. It's just the wrong war. Because in Apocalypse Now, they'd be on LSD, right? In the jungle, and here's Betty Grable, So they did that, and they after Bastogne, they went to Weimar, and they used to make these officers' clubs called donut dugouts. And they had an officers' club, and they were running it, and Patton shows up. They had just gotten there. And he tells them, ladies, we're going to liberate a prison. There's a prison on the hill. So get ready. It's going to be rough duty. You're going in the morning. And these women knew nothing, and they thought it was a POW camp. They thought it was like a stalag, and they were going to get their boys, the B-17 boys, out. And we were talking earlier, they made ham sandwiches. Yeah, and they filled baskets with ham sandwiches, and they were driven up in a Jeep, and they started to realize something was terribly wrong. They didn't know they had no concept of what they were going to find, and they drive into Buchenwald, and she talked about it reluctantly, but the thing we were talking about this in the green room, the thing that haunted her was her first moment when she came in, and she would always tell me, until she died, we pulled in, and there were bulldozers moving stacks of birch trees and dropping them in trenches until I realized they weren't birch trees. And she didn't know what to do. She wasn't a nurse. She's not going to hand out ham sandwiches. She doesn't have the coffee machine. She was just, they're like, comfort them. Comfort them. And she talked about how when you'd go in the barracks, the lice would move like sea foam. She was just, and she had a camera. So she started taking photographs. And then she said she got so ashamed of herself for shooting pictures of the bodies and things that she stopped. And then later she realized that she was more ashamed that she had stopped because she should have taken more. So you can imagine, I mean, my mom, she was a socialite, you know, from New York. What did she know? And she'd already been through this maniacal war. And then after that, we moved on, right? And they were going to Berchtesgaden and go up in the mountains. And she was in a Jeep that went off a cliff. And her leg was almost severed. She was disemboweled. And she spent 6 weeks in a MASH tent till they could get her out. It's just a horrible story. And she came home just out of her mind. And she came back to New York, and, you know, her family didn't believe her. They thought, oh, you know, Buchenwald. That's overdramatic. And as many of the women who survived it said, they came home and were basically told, yeah, put your apron on, honey. Get back to cooking. And they were like, no, what? No. And so they're all gone. I mean, the women who survive now are 96, 97 years old, and they're almost all gone. And so she left behind all of her journals. She left behind her albums of photographs and all this stuff. And I've sat on it my whole life, and suddenly I started thinking, wait a minute, what an incredible story. Only I can tell it, you know? My mom. So nobody will publish the books these women wrote, so they self-published them. So I've got the library of all the Donut Dolly books. And my mother always talked about this woman, Darling Jill. Darling Jill, the Amazon, this big, tough Indiana Jill, you know. And I thought Darling Jill was dead. We all did. And we got this book. It was the hardest to find of these books. And it's full of photographs, and we're thumbing through it, and there's pictures of my mom. Beautiful at the front, handing out mail and stuff. And a chapter how she spent her Christmas Eve in Bastogne, which I did not know. Mind shredding. And so we found out Jill's name. And Cindy, the reporter, 20-year veteran reporter, said, well, let's look her up. And she's looking for Jill's, obituary. And she finds this YouTube video, Miss Jill Goes to War. She's like, wait, come here. I said, what? I said, look, watch this. And it's Miss Jill. Oh, yes, I was in the truck with Phil. Fight the Nazis. You know, it's like, whoa. And there's pictures of my mom in this little thing. And so we look it up, and she's alive, and she lives 2 hours from our house. And so I was like, I'm too scared to write her. I can't write her. She's like, you got to write her. I said, I'm not going to write her. You write her. So Cindy wrote her one of these great old-fashioned letters, you know, very nice, polite, all this stuff. And Miss Jill called us right up. I can't believe this is a red letter day. So we drove down there, and we've been spending a lot of time with her, finding out about it firsthand, the last living witness from my mother's truck, you know. And, you know, she's like, let's look at these photo albums. And she opens them up, and here's a picture of my mom on the beach with this stud muffin in swim trunks. I was like, well, Miss Jill, what's up with this picture? And she says, it was a war. We all had men. And then she tells me, you know, I spent part of the war collecting Nazi flags. And I said, why? And she said, I cut them up. I needed red cloth. And I said, red cloth from Nazi flags? And she said, that's right. I sewed my wedding dress out of them. And I said, wait, you got married in a red dress made of Nazi flags? And Miss Jill says, I was not a virgin. That's research, man. You know? I love it. You know? Yeah. So it's so hard to do justice to it. And she can't quite figure out what I'm doing. You're writing my story? I said, no. I made up, you know, a truck that didn't exist, and it's based on everybody's stories, but you're the living witness, you know. You can tell us about how the donuts were and what the truck's like inside. And we found some Czechoslovakian model company makes a model. It's the only model you can get of a donut dolly truck. So we built it, you know, and she's coaching me. And you know, again, the understory happens. You know, we've traveled, we've gone to Europe, we've gone to all these places and all the museums, the Imperial War Museum and stuff, and the War Museum in New Orleans. And we called them and told them what I was doing, and they said, yeah, come on down. We have some donut dolly uniforms in the back, you know. So we went, and I'd only seen black and white pictures, so I thought the uniforms were brown. And they're actually this beautiful blue-gray. They had actually had them tailored in London for the ladies. Just styling, you know. So the woman pulls out the uniform. It's really haunting to hold it, of these women. And then she says, well, what are you looking for? And I said, I'm looking for the truck. And she said, you know, we've got one. We've got one in the warehouse. You want to see it? I was like, yeah. So we walk down to the warehouse. She unlocks the gates, and I enter into Boyland. I mean, it was like the world's coolest toy collection. They had a B-26 Liberator inside in pieces. I was like, damn, you know? And there was the truck. And so instead of looking at pictures, we're crawling around in the truck and looking at the stick shifts and seeing where the guns were clipped and the shovels went, you know? And she's like, this is fun. What else do you got? What do you want to know? I said, nah, come on, you know, this is good enough. She said, no, come on. Because there were Sherman tanks and stuff. And she says, hit me with something. I said, I don't know, in Weimar, they had a liberated Nazi staff car. And I said, and it was an Opel, and it didn't have brakes. And she said, yeah, I've got an Opel Nazi staff car over here with no brakes. Seriously. I was like, come on. She said, no, come on. And she had it. So that's the car in my book. I took pictures of all the serial numbers. That's now the car in the book, right? And then she says, come on, hit me with another one. I said, well, actually, when they were on the front line, she hooked up with a British artillery crew, and they had let her pull the lanyard on the gun, and she was firing shells until she realized that she was probably killing people. And she was like, wow, what year? I said 1945. She goes, German lines? I said, yeah. And she goes, yeah, that gun's right over here. And it just happened over and over. So at that time, the character that drove the truck was named Jill in honor of dead Jill, who's now alive. So check this out. I changed her name to Dorothy. And we went down to New Orleans about 2 months ago. And we went to see the truck. And it's completely refurbished, and it's named the Dorothy. Well, it had nothing to do with me, but I was like, what? Wow. So then you ask yourself, what is going on? You know?
Understory.
Understory. That's what's happening.
Yeah.
So the Dorothy, man.
Wow. Well, it's amazing stories, and I can't wait to read what comes of that. And
yeah, if I ever finish it.
Yes, you will. I would just want to, we're so running late, and I want to take two questions.
Sorry.
No. I mean, I could talk about this for hours, but listening to you talk about that project, which I can only fathom a tiny bit of how difficult it will be. It is. I was reminded I took down this quote by your buddy Charles Bowden and Chuck. But he said, you know, if you can write, it's a gift. You didn't earn it. You can study and get better, but it's still a gift. And he said, I'm paraphrasing now, but if you don't use it for the very best and most important thing that you possibly can, then it's a sin, it's a crime. He said, you might as well be dead. You're just wasting it. And he also said, the only voyage of discovery is to go back where you started. It isn't to flee something, it's to face something and comprehend it, which I feel like is exactly what you're doing. So, Peter, do we have time for 2 questions? Okay. Any questions from the audience? Anybody? I can't really see, so
it's so mysterious.
Wait, somebody back there.
Oh, there
yes.
you go.
I don't know, it's not a very focused question, but one of the things you said was empathy ruins violence. And I'd love to hear you say just a few words more
Yeah. Yeah. You know, coming out of Tijuana, I've been, I've had a lot of experience of awfulness and so forth, and you know, a lot of experiences in my own family of bad things. My father was killed at the hands of Mexican police, who then sold me his corpse. Things like that. A lot of gangbangers, and it just strikes me that, you know, there's a certain moment when that kind of evil cannot function, and people have a barrier to it. People have a barrier to stop you from being human. You're an illegal. You're just gay. One of the greatest poets in the country works with me, and somebody in my faculty told him, "You got this job because you're black." Those things minimize us or put us, you know, in a weird little box, and then we stop being human. So one of the rules I always give my writing students is that laughter, because they're always like, "How come your books are funny?" You know, it's like, because people are funny. Real people are funny. So I always tell them laughter is a virus that infects us with humanity. And if you sit with somebody and laugh together, really laugh together, it's almost impossible to walk away and think, wow, those people, those blank. And it's the same if you weep with somebody. And so, you know, the whole empathy thing, you know, even Pope Francis, you know, he told all the Jesuits, y'all who teach, the curriculum is going to be empathy and human rights and understanding. So schools everywhere, or Loyola, scrambling to get programs of empathy going, because rock star Pope Francis told them to. You know, and I think people can't afford empathy. It's too dangerous. You'd be weeping about things forever. But you have to. You have to, and it asks of us a celebration rather than an attack. It asks of us to comprehend someone, even, oh my God, a Muslim person loves their child. And once you do that, you are screwed. You know, you're screwed. We're talking about the Holocaust. Talk about a complete shutting down of human empathy. Oh, those guards had empathy for each other. They listened to polkas and drank and had lovely German Shepherd dogs they loved. But there's some terrible switch that's thrown. So that's what I'm talking about. And, you know, I think I learned it really in the Devil's Highway work, you know, hanging out with those Border Patrol men who I thought were really cruel and awful. And then they started slipping out their humanity. And, you know, people who feel things profoundly, even in the forest green. So, you know, it's just a pet theory of mine. I don't have any proof of it, but I think it's absolutely true. And a lot of times, you know, especially me, because I'm wed to a dedication to write a literature of witness all the time. I'll never publish anything that's just crap so I can make some money. It's purpose-driven for me. And so I spend my time, you know, talking to invisible people who've been marginalized and don't like it. I've had this astounding, you heard this weird one book thing, the big read. I just came here from LA, and, you know, I'm now being taken to schools over and over again and facing 800, 1,000 kids. Never come to see it all. And there I am. And they're like, dude, how come you look Irish? But that moment happened, you know, and they won't leave, man. They will not leave. The assembly bell rings, they're like, we're not going. You know? So it just takes sometimes one, I care. One, I believe, and if you're really feeling daring, I love you. That's scary. Try that in a state prison. I love you, dog. You know? Sometimes you have to do it through the page. But I think it's really important. I think we all hunger for it. So, you know, one of my other rules I always tell my writing students, especially the nonfiction ones, is you've got to understand, because my first books were about the Tijuana garbage dump and the people picking trash to live and so forth. And I always tell them, because I come from class rage myself, you know, I still sometimes, except now I want to buy one, but still, if I see a Beamer sometimes, I'm like, bastard! And I say, oh no, wait a minute, I'm in some big suite down here at this hotel. It's okay, they can have a Beamer. Now I want one. But I always try to remind my students that everybody on earth has lived in the Tijuana garbage dump, or will. Everybody on earth is going to be sick one day, or has been sick, or has lost somebody, or has been dealt a dirty blow, or is going to lose somebody. It's guaranteed every love story is going to have something sad in it, you know, and we have to understand that. Yeah, it may not be, you know, the kind of melodramatic suffering that my homies in the barrio see, but we all suffer. And so that empathy, if I could just get it to flow back and forth, it would change the world. I don't know if we can in this age of ISIS and all these other things going on. The narcos in Mexico don't have it, but you know, people of goodwill do. And now you're seeing these uprisings of, you know, 1 million marchers saying no more violence in Mexico. Doesn't get on the nightly news up here, but it's happening. That's people who have empathy for the 43 students and for the beheaded women. And it's enough. They don't want this anymore. So that's what I think about it. I think it works. I can't prove it though, but I think it works.
Well, I can tell you there's someone in the audience who spent an hour with me, Jay Stansel, who was a federal defense lawyer for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
Defending immigrants, and he...
Oh, God bless you, man.
And he read it to many judges, your work, to, you know, show them, to try and get them to deeply understand what people were going through. And
That's so cool.
You know...
Can I tell you, I gotta tell you something. I was just in Flagstaff, and they're sending trips down to the border, and they went to Nogales, and they went to the border patrol station, and the guy says to him, "You want to understand this here milieu, read Bill's Highway by..." And they came back, and they're like, "Guess what?" I said, yeah, Border Patrol sells books for me, you know. But it was so cool, because they certainly did, they were so suspicious of me, you know. I mean, guy, Mexican, writes about Mexican poor people. I showed up, I had long hair and earring. I think I was Bono at that time, you know. And they were like, but it happened, and things opened up.
Any last questions? One?
I have a question. You write so richly about the border, and you live in Chicago. How does that work?
Well, Chicago is the second largest United States population of Mexicans. And we are about to have a Chicano mayor. Chuy Garcia. Chuy Garcia. The guy's campaign stickers are just a picture of his mustache. I think Chicago's going to freak out. Imagine Chicagoans are saying, wait, there's a Mexican named Jesus is going to be the mayor? I don't think so. But he's giving Ram a run for his money. It's just an accident of, you know, of fate. So I was born in Tijuana, raised in Tijuana on a dirt street. Rampa Independencia. I was dying of tuberculosis. They came to San Diego. I was raised in San Diego. Was never going to go anywhere, ever. And then, believe it or not, in 1982, I was hired to teach writing at Harvard. I don't understand it. Talk about miracles. And off I went. And once I went there, as my brother Juan, he said to the family, he gathered all the family to explain this, and he said, "Mira, Luis has gone from frijoles to Boston baked beans." That was the whole family was like, oh. So once I got to Boston, it just began lots of wandering, and you know, Chicago was totally an accident. I was in Tucson working on Hummingbird's Daughter, and met my wife, interestingly, in newspaper interview. Longest interview in history right there. And I was invited to go to Lafayette, Louisiana to be writer in residence. And once I got there, I started winning literary awards. And once the awards game starts, then people suddenly notice you. And I was trying to get back to the Rockies because I love living in the Rockies, but Chicago offered automatic tenure if I'd go there. And I thought, guy from Tijuana being given a job they cannot fire him from. That was all right, you know. And went there, and it just turned into, it was like the Venus flytrap, man. And we had kids, and the kids don't want to leave. But I'm coming back west. My wife's from here. She's from Burien. Oh yeah, come on now. Burien, baby. So, you know, the family's all, her family's here. And one of my nephews may or may not be undocumented and may or may not live north of Seattle, I won't say, but, you know, I have family here too. So once we leave Chicago, which I think will be not that far away, we're going to come back to the Northwest.
Okay.